Welcome to Episode 3 of Dave Talks Comics and Cartoons. My name is Dave Levine, a.k.a. Kilmarock, on the 11 O'Clock Comics and Comic Geek Speak forums. I like to read comics and watch cartoons. I've been reading and watching off and on since the mid-'70s. I don't read current comic books or watch the latest cartoons. On this episode, I'll be talking about the following: comic book conventions, specifically this year's conventions, stuff I read, such as Quantum and Woody, 1 through 4, Krypton Chronicles, 1 through 3, and Marvel 2-in-1, number 7, and stuff I watched, Justice League Hereafter. I want to talk comic book cons, comic book conventions, for comic book shows for a few minutes. I had plans to go to more shows than I'm going to end up hitting this year. Originally, I wanted to go to the Toronto Comic Con in March, but stuff came up at work, my boss quit, and it just didn't seem like a good time for me to take off. And I mean, I had a place to stay, I had travel arrangements and all that. I hadn't bought a ticket to the show yet, so the only money I lost was the bus ticket that I bought for the bus ride up there, but so that didn't work out. I did go to Comic Geek Speak Super Show in Reading, Pennsylvania in April, and that was a lot of fun. It's my third time going to that event. And I picked up some nice art pieces, I picked up some comics, I picked up some trades, went to a panel or two, and I even did some orienteering while I was up there. The next show I wanted to go to was the Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina in early June. Unfortunately, it turned out that there was something else I had to go to. It was a cousin of mine who was getting married, and the wedding was the same weekend, and because the distance involved in getting to Charlotte just didn't make sense for me to go. So hopefully I'll go next year. But I am planning on buying one of the T-shirts from the show, which I think are gorgeous, which have a picture of the Rocketeer drawn by Lee Weeks. And I really love the picture. I really love the colors, the combination of the colors they put into this. And, yeah. So since I didn't go to Heroes Con, I've decided I am going to go to Otakon this year. And I'm going to do it right. Because the only previous time I went to Otakon, which is an anime and manga convention in Baltimore, I only went for one day. And you really, I think, probably need to go for more than one day to get the full experience. I mean, it's a huge show, probably the biggest show I've ever been to. Probably bigger than probably bigger than Heroes Con. So they have a ton of panels, they have a ton of programming, all kinds of stuff. And it's in the Baltimore Convention Center. And so I've bought my ticket, and you have to pay for you have to buy a membership for the whole show. And it's $70 if you buy before July 7th or something like that, or maybe it's the 9th. After that, it goes up by $10. So I bought my ticket, and I have plans for parking, and so I'm going to drive up there each day since it's only about a 40-minute drive from my place. And so hopefully I'll get more out of it this time than I did in 2011. So that's in early August. So then early September, there's the Baltimore Comic Con, which is the same place at the Baltimore Convention Center. And this will be the fourth year in a row that I've gone. And I haven't bought my tickets yet, but I have made parking arrangements, and I think it should be a lot of fun. I actually stayed in Baltimore the first couple of years I went, but the hotel prices are they're like double what I was paying 4 years ago. So And I just can't justify it, especially when it's such a short drive up there and parking. And now that I know about the parking, it doesn't make sense to stay up there. And the final show, which I'm not going to be going to, is the Small Press Expo, or SPX, which is here in the DC area. I've gone the last 4 years. This year I've decided I'm going to be going out of town to do a trail race that weekend, which I really want to do. Get to visit with a friend of mine up in that area, up in Pennsylvania. So, but anyway, I'm not going. But the Small Press Expo is a great show, but I don't think I'll miss out too much by not going 1 year. And I don't think I'll miss out in general by not hitting as many shows as I have in the past. Last year I hit 4 shows. I went to Heroes Con. I went to Baltimore Comic Con. I went to the Small Press Expo. Or maybe I only did 3 shows. I could have sworn there was a 4th one. Anyway, I think I'm hitting enough shows. I have a ton of stuff to read, so I certainly don't need to be buying stuff. I can certainly cool it on the art purchases, which I'll be doing some of. So I think just hitting Otakon and Baltimore Comic Con, and maybe I'll hit one of these small shows that they have here in the DC area before the year is out. But I think that should be enough. A little while ago, say a month or so ago, there was a sale on Comixology they had all of the original run of Quantum and Woody on sale. This is a series I'd never read before. I'd heard it mentioned on the Dollar Bin podcast. And so I decided to pick up some issues. Initially, I was thinking about picking up the whole run of something like 19 issues or something like that. But in the end, I decided just to pick up the first 4. The first issue was free. All the other issues were on sale for 99 cents each. Normally, they're $1.99. And so I just got the first 4, and I finally finished them off. I kind of took my time working my way through them. Although they're not exactly heavy material. And I like the look of the book, and I like the humor, and it's a decent setup. But I don't think I'm going to read any more. I don't know, there's just something, there's not enough there to keep me hooked. I'm looking for a little more, and maybe I'm not giving the book enough of a chance, but I can't tell if it's a case where the story is just evolving slowly, or if the writer, Christopher Priest, is just making it up as he goes along, is just piecing it together and writing the stories as they come to him. I'm not sure. I don't know him or his stuff. I've read some of his other stuff, but I don't know him very well. So it's hard for me to tell. And I just, there's other stuff I want to read. So I'm going to let it go at that. I think it's worth a try, especially if you like superhero books with humor in them, which is what this is. It's a story of 2 guys who were friends when they were younger, and then kind of grew apart, and then are joined by they've got these armbands that have to be touched together once every 24 hours, otherwise their bodies break down or something like that. But so there's superheroes. One wears a mask, one doesn't. One's black, one's white. So it's an interesting series. It's there's something to it. I just didn't find enough there to keep my attention, and the fact that it took me a month or 2 to read 4 issues probably should say something. But I gave it a shot. I'm glad I did. I don't regret spending the $3 I spent to pick up those 3 issues that I had to pay for. And I'm ready to move on to something else now. Next we have Krypton Chronicles. This is a miniseries from the early 1980s, September of 81 to November of 81, that looks back at Superman's past, not just Superman's past, but his ancestors, his family tree. It's a 3-issue miniseries. It's probably been superseded, a lot of the information in this, or maybe repeated in other stories since then, since this is over 30 years old at this point. But basically it opens with Clark Kent meeting with Perry White and the then owner of the Daily Planet, Morgan Edge. And Morgan Edge, looking at the popularity of television miniseries like Roots and Holocaust, wants to do something similar for Superman. And so he tasks Clark Kent with digging up Superman's past and writing a series of articles on it for the Planet. So Superman has to go back he doesn't go back in time, but he has to find a way to get all this information. So over the series of these 3 issues, basically Superman learns more and more, and it basically works backwards through his ancestors' past. In the first 2 issues, he travels to Kandor, which has since been moved and possibly renamed, because in the late 1970s, Kandor, which originally it was the bottled city of Kandor, which was captured by Brainiac before Krypton exploded, and then rescued by Superman, and then for a time it was kept by Superman in his Fortress of Solitude. And then at some point in the 1970s, I think in the Superman family book, Kandor was transported to another planet and grown, because when Brainiac captured Kandor, he shrunk it down. And so it was grown back up big, but it was on a world with a red sun. So the people who were there did not have superpowers. The Kryptonians there did not have superpowers. Anyway, Superman travels to Kandor. Superman with Supergirl travels to Kandor, and they both look into their ancestors' past. And so the series basically goes back into the past, and it's working its way backward, which is a little confusing for me. Maybe some people, it makes sense to them, but I thought it was a little confusing to work backwards instead of forwards. And at first, it felt a little bit like continuity porn, because I really had I've read a few old Superman stories that delve into his past, but not enough, and not recently. And so this kind of felt more like the sort of thing that you need to read over and over, and that you need to relate to other stories that deal with Superman's ancestors, and possibly his travels into the past to visit his ancestors. At the end of the first issue, actually the end of all 3 issues, there is a Krypton glossary. It's not the exact same glossary in each issue, although there is a little bit of overlap between them. And in the second issue, in the centerfold, there is a map of Krypton, which can also be found online, and I will provide a link to that, I'll provide a link to that in the show notes. And it's a fairly basic map of Krypton. It's not too terribly detailed. And then in the third issue, there's the map of Krypton, yes. So it basically looks like, it's kind of done the way you got 2 circles for each hemisphere, the old world hemisphere, the new world hemisphere, and they mark certain places. And if you reference it as you're reading the story, it'll make sense, a little more sense, carry more meaning. And then in the third issue, in the centerfold, there is a family tree for Superman, which goes all the way back to the first L's, because Superman's Kryptonian name is Kal-El, to the very first L, and tells the story, his story. On the whole, I read this because I found this at a sale at the Wild Pig comic sale last year in the spring of 2012, and I had never read it, and so I figured it's a good, even though it doesn't really relate to what's going on right now in the Superman comics. Well, I don't really keep up with what's going on right now that much, so but I'd always been curious about this, and I'd also read the Untold Secrets of the Batman miniseries, and I believe these were the first two miniseries that DC Comics released. I believe the Batman one came out first. So if you're big on Superman continuity, you might want to read this. If you're reading the current comics, I don't know, unless you really want to be a completist, you may not care about this. I'm not sure how accurate things like the family tree and the map of Krypton are still, but for historical purposes, I think it's worth a look. And not a great story, but for completeness sake, I feel like it was worth my time. Oh boy. Marvel 2-in-1 presents The Thing and Valkyrie. This is Marvel 2-in-1 number 7 from January 1975. Marvel 2-in-1, of course, being that awesome title which featured team-ups with The Thing and other superheroes, possibly with supervillains occasionally. This one is kind of a Defenders team-up with Defenders and The Thing, because you've got both Valkyrie and Doctor Strange plays a role in this. This one is about, and the villains in this one are the Enchantress and the Executioner, both Asgardians. So there's some tie there to Valkyrie. So this one's got a little bit all over the place, and it's got some great little moments in it, but basically what it comes down to is that this guy who is captured by the Enchantress, although she's in the guise of Valkyrie, because, well, like I said, this one is all over the place. And I think it ties in a little bit. I suffer a little bit because I did not read the previous issue, although there is some. I think the previous issue was a team-up between Doctor Strange and The Thing. And there is a bit of a recap, but it still leaves me a little fuzzy. And it's kind of weird because basically what it comes down to is the Enchantress is trying to get her hands on an enchanted harmonica. And it all ties into Valkyrie's alter ego's father. And it's really bizarre, but you got some great lines from Ben Grimm. And on the whole, I'd say it was a lot of fun. So Valkyrie's father is some bum who's living in Central Park and gets snatched up and eventually runs into Ben Grimm, the Thing, and he takes off they're supposed to go to Vermont to meet up with his daughter, Barbara, who is also known as Valkyrie. But Doctor Strange doesn't want them to go, but the Thing goes anyway. And there's this great moment where Doctor Strange's astral form appears and shouts to him, "Ben, what are you doing? You're headed away from the city." And Ben's like, no offense, Doc, but I'm starting to feel like a big brother's watching me. Knock it off. Anyway, so they get to Vermont, and then, of course, that fulfills some destiny, and so the Enchantress and the Executioner shows up, and the Enchantress is about to take the harmonica when Valkyrie's father grabs it and plays it, and then the whole world goes to hell. And then they're caught in this nether region. The world seems to have been destroyed, and the only people who are still left are Valkyrie, the Thing, the Executioner, the Enchantress, and Valkyrie's father. Anyway, eventually things get righted, but it's all kind of wacky, and it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, but I guess that's Marvel at that time. But it was fun to read. It was fun to read, even if it didn't make the most sense. And it had some good lines from the Thing. I don't know if I'd recommend it to most people unless you liked Marvel from that time. But I thought it was a fun read. Couple more things. I forgot to mention the credits. The cover is done by John Romita Sr. Gorgeous cover, which features the Executioner, who's restraining the Thing, and then Valkyrie, or maybe that's supposed to be the Enchantress disguised as Valkyrie, holding a flaming sword, ready to drive it through the Thing. Great cover. And then on the interiors, Steve Gerber wrote it. Sal Buscema was the penciler. Mike Esposito, the inker. Joe Rosen, the letterer. And Bill Mantlo is the colorist. And Roy Thomas was the editor. The other thing that I wanted to talk about briefly about this issue is the scene on page 7 where the Thing stops at a gas station because he's headed up to Vermont. Is he headed up to Vermont at this point? Yeah, he's headed up to Vermont to find Valkyrie, or her alter ego, and he realizes he doesn't know where he's going. So he stops at a gas station to ask for direction. He's like, hey, and the guy, the attendant at the gas station, seems to be sleeping at the desk inside. And so Thing's like, hey, buddy, can I get some directions? And the next thing you know, he's being punched through the window. He can't figure out what's going on. And that turns out the gas station attendant is actually the Executioner in disguise. And a fight ensues, and I think eventually it turns out that the whole gas station wasn't really a gas station. It was just an illusion created by the Enchantress. But I thought that was a great little scene and deserved its own little highlight. Another one of those things that makes the issue worth the read, wacky as it is with this magic harmonica and all. This week I watched another episode of Justice League. This time around it was the 10th story from Season 2, episodes 19 and 20, Hereafter. This story, from what I understand, is supposed to be a retelling of the death of Superman's story, his death and his return. So I don't think that gives away too much, or that's a big spoiler. I think more or less everybody knows Superman was killed back in the early 90s and then brought back. I never read the story, the comics, although I think I have the actual issue, The Death of Superman. I think I inherited that from my brother, who, when he got rid of his comics or left them behind. But I've never read it. I really don't know the story of the return, of the death or the return. I think he was killed by I can't even remember the character's name. I want to say Apocalypse, but it can't be Apocalypse because that's the name of the planet that Darkseid rules. Anyway, each of these episodes, the way I see it, can be divided into 3 parts. First, you have Act 1, Scene 1, the first part of Episode 1, or Episode 19, in which Superman is killed. Basically, Deadshot, Toyman, Weather Wizard, and Livewire and Metallo team up to bump off Superman. And they hatch this plan, although it's fuzzy as to exactly what they're doing. But anyway, they start to wreak havoc in Metropolis, hoping to bring out Superman, but of course they bring out the entire Justice League. Well, in the end, they accomplish their goal, and Superman is killed. End of Act 1. Act 2 is basically the funeral for Superman. Everybody is taking it very hard. There's all kinds of ceremonies, and with the exception of Batman. Batman is in denial. He doesn't accept that Superman's dead. He makes statements along the lines of, he just disappeared. There's no remains, there's nothing that shows that he was killed. So Batman doesn't believe he's dead. He's just not sure where he is. But he thinks he was transported somewhere else. Then Act 3 is the Justice League trying to figure out what they're going to do to replace Superman. And they don't get very far into their discussion before Lobo shows up. And Lobo's heard about the death of Superman. Lobo, the bounty hunter from outer space, who made an appearance, at least one appearance, in the Superman series, and thinks he's the perfect replacement for Superman. At first he cracks heads with the League, and then eventually the League finds out that this is all taking place on the satellite. And then the League finds out that a bunch of villains have escaped from jail and are wreaking havoc once again in Metropolis. And so with the help of Lobo, they go down to Metropolis to deal with the situation. And Act 3 ends basically with them, Scene 3 of Act 1 basically ends with them doing battle with these villains. And then at the very end, it changes scenes to somewhere else where Superman is pinned under some debris, and that's the end of the first episode. So the second episode is mainly focuses on Superman, where the first episode mainly focused on the League. The first part, Scene 1 of Act 2, is Superman alone in the future, and he's wandering through this wasteland, I guess, trying to find people. He still doesn't realize that, he still isn't clear as to what happened. He thinks the League's still around. He doesn't know where he's at. He encounters some wild dogs who he fights, and he kills their leader and then tames the other ones. So, on to Scene 2. In Scene 2, he finally reaches the end of Scene 1, the beginning of Scene 2, whichever. He finally reaches what's left of the Watchtower satellite, the Justice League satellite. And soon after he arrives there, he finds somebody else, the only other person he's encountered so far, which is Vandal Savage. The only person, I guess, who would survive. And Vandal Savage tells him about what happened, about how the satellite finally fell from the sky, about how it was his plan, Vandal Savage's plan, which did something to gravity and thereby caused horrific problems to the solar system and killed everybody on Earth. And basically now the only things that are alive are giant animals, mainly beetles, which doesn't exactly explain the giant dogs, but anyway. You can't expect too much from these Justice League stories. So, for a while there, Superman hangs out with Vandal Savage. Vandal Savage is very happy to have company because he hasn't talked to anybody in years and years, although it isn't clear exactly how long it's been. And while wandering through Vandal Savage's home, Superman finds a time machine, or what to him looks like a time machine. And he suggests to Vandal Savage that they could use the time machine to fix things, but Vandal Savage tells him no, they can't, because he doesn't have a power source that's strong enough. And he used to have one, but it was captured by these giant insects. So Act 3 is them going to recover the power source. And eventually they do recover the power source, and Superman gets sent back to the past and corrects things, and the episode kind of ends. There's a flash forward to Vandal Savage seeing everything being restored to the way it used to be, or the way it should have been. And for the most part, I thought this was a pretty good story. I enjoyed it for the most part. I thought there were some parts where things went a little too quickly, like the part where Superman recovers the power source felt very rushed. It was like all of a sudden he fell down towards the power source, and all of a sudden he had the power source. And I don't know. I mean, that could have been a little more spaced out, I guess, or a little more slowly done. I don't know. It seemed to happen way too fast. And I definitely, the part of this that I really liked was Lobo, who was the comic relief instead of the Flash, who quite often is the comic relief in these episodes. Anyway, whether you've read The Death of Superman in the comic books or not, I think this episode is worth a look. It's not the best Justice League episode, but I think it's a pretty good one. That's it for this episode. If you made it this far, then thank you for listening. Comments can be left on the Libsyn page, davelevine.libsyn.com, or my blog, readingforthetrade.blogspot.com, or you can email me at emaildavelevine@yahoo.com, or you can tweet me at Kilmarok.